Hello and welcome to another Doctor's Assistant 1 video. Today I'm doing a review of the Gallifrey Time War box set volume 1, or the first volume box set. On the front of the box set, well, a little bit of a disclaimer, this is the first box set review I've done on the YouTube channel, so if it's not that good, that's my excuse. And it's, yeah, so yeah, this has been on my radar since the first initial announcement and or trailer, predominantly because of the fact that it's the Dalek Emperor, and I'm a massive fan of the Dalek Emperor, and that of sorts. I mean, you know, he's in the last two-parter of the first series of the revived one, so that was basically nostalgia for me, hearing his voice, and that, you know, Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways, I think it is. But yeah, so you've got, from the world of Doctor Who, and then you've got Gallifrey Time War Volume 1, Big Finish, We Love Stories, and then you've got all of the cast and people, so the guy who plays Narvin, Leela, Derek Jacobi's Master, Sophie Aldridge as Ace, the guy who plays Drax, I think it's Drax anyway, Lalla Ward as Romana, and then what looks to me as though an image of like Arcadia maybe, like the painting like thing in the 50th kind of looks like that. On the spine you've got the Seal of Rassilon, looking really cool there, Gallifrey Time War, and then number 1 for volume 1, yeah, and then Big Finish, We Love Stories, and then on the back you've got the synopsis as well as some of the artwork for the box sets, or CDs of sorts maybe, and then all the title names, and then who they're by, and that. And then what's weird about this box set is the fact that instead of it being 5 single CDs, it's one. If I can just get this out of the cover with only one hand. Nope, that ain't gonna work. It's like this big thing, like case thing, with a bunch of CDs in there. So just like so. Inside you've got the pamphlet thing as well as bonus features as well. So it's just odd because it's not in the traditional sort of 4 CD separately thing. It's just one big one. So I wonder if more releases this year, as this is a 2018 release from Big Finish, or at least I think it is. Yeah, it came out in February this year. So yeah, each story's about an hour long. Starting off with Celestial Intervention, which was a decent introduction to the overall box set and set the tone and the sort of theme of the story, of the whole box set even, predominantly having mainly Romana, Narvin and Leela, who are predominantly the OG sort of original, from what I understand, Gallifrey cast of this sort of spin-off and that. Yeah, so it's decent. It doesn't really have any real sort of substance or sort of point of focus. I mean, the main sort of probably point of focus I could gather from Celestial Intervention is that the Celestial Intervention Agency and the War Council are sort of butting heads, and there's quite a bit of conflict there, which I thought was quite interesting to see that. It obviously starts the whole sort of Time War thing off as well. Like, this is very much set in the early days of the Time War, and that centered around Gallifrey and the politics of Gallifrey, of course, and how the politics of Gallifrey drastically changes because of the fact that they're in this wartime. I think there's a plot twist towards the end which I didn't think was predictable per se. I didn't know that was going to happen, but the thing is, it's a plot twist that it's not predictable by any means, but it's something that I'd already seen in another Big Finish audio, so I felt like it wasn't as good. It could have been better. It didn't feel like it was as developed, or sort of there wasn't as much sort of detail, and you know, we weren't really sort of digging into that sort of aspect of the Time War as much as they could have done. It was literally just a plot twist that felt tacked on, to be honest, and that But don't get me wrong, I do think that all the performances were really good in Celestial Intervention. It felt like Star Wars or Doctor Who meets Star Wars, in the sense that it did give a big sort of epic scope to the story. But in doing that, you almost lose that finer sort of tight sort of airtight sort of storytelling that Doctor Who's more renowned for, I think, and is probably better at doing than, say, Star Wars. Star Wars is very sort of grandiose and spectacular, although I think storytelling-wise that is the weaker franchise of the two personally, because it is very much just the good versus the evil, whereas Doctor Who can tell a lot more different stories and, you know, more complex stories, I think, considering its format. But here it's fairly basic. It's a decent introduction to the whole sort of, as I say, like sort of Time War aspect of the Gallifrey series, and I think it makes for an interesting listen. It is decent. There is a bit about refugees as well, and that people looking for asylum on Gallifrey and that, which I thought was quite interesting. So for me, Celestial Intervention would be a strong 7 out of 10. Moving on to the second story, Soldier Obscura, that was a really good listen. I really enjoyed that one. That one was really fun. It was very much put the time in Time War. It had, in contrast to the first one, quite a bit more depth. This one wasn't so much set on Gallifrey as much as it was set away from Gallifrey in this weird sort of weird timey-wimey, for lack of a better term, paradoxical like dimension of sorts, with Sophie Aldred as Ace and Drax, and then his teacher as well. So, but Drax was very much in this story like Ace's teacher. So then you've got like the sort of Padawan, the Master and or Jedi, and then the Jedi of the Jedi almost. So you've got like, you know, a bunch of different people. A lot of sort of betrayal and conflict. Betrayal and conflict is probably the two best ways to overall describe the box set as a whole, you know, and I think that just shows the sort of fragmented nature of the Time War, you know, that it's so drastically bigger a sort of event in the Doctor Who universe that it does ripple and shatter friendships and relationships, good and bad, and old and new alike, you know, because Ace doesn't really much trust Drax, and neither does his old mentor. I think the reason as to why I really liked Soldier Obscura over Celestial Intervention was because finally we got some Daleks in the story, and even then they aren't overused. There's no real overkill there. They're well used. They're interesting, you know, which can not be said for the new series, unfortunately, anymore. But, you know, you've got these Daleks that have been mutated and very much being augmented and experimenting on themselves with wings and that, which is brings a very vivid, sort of strong imagery there to me. There's stuff about the Obscura and what it is, and that what I won't ruin here, but it's very interesting, or at least it was to me. There's just a lot more substance and depth, and a lot more interesting things happen in Soldier Obscura, and each sort of story pretty much feels like it has like a distinctive sort of cliffhanger that never really gets wrapped up so much, to my knowledge anyway, or at least leaves the characters in sort of oh shit sort of predicaments that might get picked up later in other stories, as it kind of does happen in the next story with Leela's character even. I can't remember if there's any other sort of real cast members. Maybe Ace and Drax do appear towards the latter end of Celestial Intervention even. I do think that for the most part, though, the only two that are really connected is the first and last story. Soldier Obscura and The Devil You Know are very much just sort of two separate stories, and two separate stories from the first and last one, as I say. So there's nothing really connecting all of these stories together, or four of them, and that besides the fact that they're all set in the Time War, I guess. So Overall, though, I would give Soldier Obscura a 8 out of 10. I adored it. It was really kept me on my toes. I really enjoyed listening to it. It was a phenomenal, fun, entertaining listen. And that definitely one of the highlights of the box set. The Devil You Know features Derek Jacobi as the Master, who, fun fact, this was his first recording of a Big Finish audio, and considering that he is phenomenal here, because they wrote this story way back when they got him for the role or to reprise his role as the Master, and then got him to record this as well as all of the War Master box set and all stories in one big block. But they started out with The Devil You Know, so considering that, I think he plays the part superbly. There's some decent and really interesting interactions between Derek Jacobi's Master and Louise Jameson as Leela. You know, she mentions about his sort of Geoffrey Beevers incarnation being a lot more sort of easier to read and that, and she makes almost a really interesting comment about, you know, the fact that Derek Jacobi's Master doesn't look like the Geoffrey Beevers one, in the sense that, you know, you look like you're a lot more conniving and scared and hiding a lot more, you know, whereas your predecessor was a lot more sort of open and I could read him better, sort of thing, which is quite interesting, really, considering that that's not something I ever really sort of took into account. The idea that, obviously, you know, with the burnt-faced, crispy, sort of charred up Master, you know, that his physical appearance reflects emotionally that is vulnerable, really, and maybe, if anything, that maybe makes that version of the Master even more dangerous, maybe, you know, because he's got more to lose, I guess, and therefore he's got more to try and gain and fight for. The Devil You Know, it's not the best story. Besides the decent interactions with Derek Jacobi and Louise Jameson, I think the thing is, it's a good Master story, but I was expecting more of a Time War at the forefront, and the Master be interwoven into the story, whereas it feels very much like a Master story first and a Time War story secondary, unfortunately, which wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't in a box set titled Gallifrey Time War. you know, I think maybe the writer hadn't quite grasped how to write Derek Jacobi's Master into the Time War, so to speak. The ending is quite interesting, and apparently Leela's fate leads into the War Doctor box sets, which is interesting, and that's quite interesting. I think, again, there is some sort of timey-wimey, again, sort of paradoxical aspect, much like Soldier Obscura with the Obscura. There's this sort of idea that this person uses a certain Time War weapon that then fractures them into two and splits their timeline into two, and so there's like two versions of the same person. Leela and the Master have to sort of interrogate them, you know, play good cop, bad cop, but I don't know, it's kind of iffy for me, because, again, besides that, it really didn't feel that interesting, and again, they're away from Gallifrey, which I'm fine with, again, if it wasn't so much for the fact that it's called Gallifrey. Time War, you know, not massive on the Time War aspect, no Daleks, also away from Gallifrey, I guess, and that, so that one, for me, The Devil You Know only got 6 out of 10, unfortunately, but the performances were good in all of these stories, by the way, so Desperate Measures very much really nicely wraps up the overall sort of box set really nicely. It's the only one that really sort of references the other 3 stories. Again, it very much bookends the box set really nicely. All the first and the last story really nicely bookend each other, and all the box set as a whole. Again, I think the sort of Desperate Measures, if anything, is just a continuation of Celestial Intervention, or just a continuation of like almost all of the themes and sort of beats and story. The tone of the stories, all of the stories intertwined and interwoven into one, and although I could tell where the story, where the sort of big wow factor and big plot twist was going right at the end. I did enjoy it. It wasn't as sort of underwhelming as Celestial Intervention, that plot twist. It really enthralled me. It had the Dalek Emperor. There was a lot of really cool politics sort of stuff, mirroring even Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I think it was. Was it Hillary Clinton? Was that her name? Anyway, with Romana and this other character who's a warrior, or was a warrior on the front lines, and there's mentions of Arcadia, and that's another thing in the Celestial Intervention. We go to the Death Zone, so there are quite a lot of nice, like, Doctor Who references there, of course, and that the Dalek Emperor's in Desperate Measures. You know, really love the Dalek Emperor. His appearance in this is so cool, or his involvement in this is really cool. Again, one of the oppositions to Romana uses her talking to the Dalek Emperor as a sort of scare tactic for Gallifrey, you know, almost again mirroring the whole sort of American politics thing of, like, I think Trump leaking all of Hillary's emails, and that, you know, just some really interesting stuff, and it, as I say, wraps up the box set nicely, and that, and just makes for this sort of, like, sort of almost ticking clock almost. You know, when you first listen to Desperate Measures, it feels like there's this ticking even clock, where there's this almost like sort of like counting down, like, to this sort of doomsday Armageddon thing, you know, which is practically the Time War. You know, there is mention of you know, the Doctor throughout this, and the fact that, you know, he didn't want any part of the Time War, and he's buggered off, and that, and some of the characters make a point, you know, but we don't blame him. He's not a warrior. He doesn't want any part of this. And someone else, I think it might have been Drax, says something about the fact that, you know, Narvin might have, I can't remember who it was specifically, but someone studies the Matrix, and, you know, that's like a supercomputer that can see all of the different timelines, and that on Gallifrey, and all of them are basically saying, yep, we're going to end up in a time war. So, you know, and Romana's really adamant that obviously that shouldn't happen, but it seems inevitable in this timeline as well as every other one, which, you know, is really depressing. So overall, I would give this, tallying up all of the scores for these 4 stories, because Desperate Measures is a 9 out of 10 for me. It's really strong, really good, sort of epic romp of a story, and it feels like it's got a lot more drama, tension. It feels like Celestial Intervention, but sort of cranked up to, you know, the nth degree, quite frankly. You know, the stakes are higher, basically. It starts off the box set fairly mediocre-ish, gets really good with Soldier Obscura, dips down with The Devil You Know, unfortunately, and then goes back up with Desperate Measures. So for me, the box set out of 40 would be a 30 out of 40 for me. Thanks for watching. Comment, rate, and subscribe.